Hello and welcome everybody to today's event, Bracing for the Social Media Blizzard, how Stearns County is keeping the digital records road open. And as a former state trooper in Kansas who got lots of snow, let me tell you that's not an easy feat. So my name's Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow for government technology. I'm also a national media analyst on issues of cybersecurity, cybercrime, and identity theft. I'm excited to serve as the moderator today for today's event and want to say thank you for taking an hour out of your day to join us. I know we're in for a great session over the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody within 48 hours. You can use the recording for your reference or feel free, and we encourage you to pass it along to your colleagues and other folks who could not attend today. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and you can participate in the Q&A with us by asking questions at any time during the presentation. We promise we'll get to as many as we can during the session, and then we have 10 minutes reserved at the end to actually address your questions between our guests today. So if you have any questions, pass them along, hit the Q&A portion, the little button down there in the lower left-hand corner, and if you'd like to download a PDF of the slides today for the presentation, you can do so by clicking on the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. Now, also during today's webinar, we encourage you to reach out to all of your friends with LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. I mean, this is about social media, folks, so we encourage you to do it. Use hashtag GTLive to connect with everybody over Twitter. I've already sent out the first tweet today, so let's everybody pile on and share this information. So also at this time, we recommend you disable any of your pop-up blockers, and if you are experiencing any media player issues or have any other problems, visit our webcast help guide by clicking on the help button. So what we want to do today is let's get started. I want to introduce our guest today on this very timely topic. Our first one is, after I speak, will be Dory Dahlberg. She's the Web Communications Specialist, Information Services for Stearns County, Minnesota, and Anil Chawla, who is the founder and CEO for ArchiveSocial, our sponsor for today. So before we get started, let me go through a couple things, tell you about the agenda. Here's what we'll be talking about today. We're actually going to get into some real-world examples, and Anil will be doing a screencast. We'll do a live demonstration of the platforms that you can see. These are all of our pretty smiling faces today, so if you want to know who the face is behind the name, that's who we are. So let's talk about this thing. Let's just kick this off real quick. But before we do that, I just want to tell you a little bit about government technology. A lot of award-winning publications and records covering information about information technology's role. We're a National Research and Advisory Institute, as it shows here on policies and best practices in state and local government. So if you haven't checked us out, I encourage you to look at all of the resources we have. So I like to get this started off by kind of showing an example. This is what it's about today. It's about ones and zeros. That's what it ultimately boils down to, and how you manage these ones and zeros. So these ones and zeros happen to be my name, Morgan Wright. So what I want to do is let's kick this off. Let me introduce you to Stearns County real quick and talk about a couple things. First of all, as you can see, obviously lots of pretty places. We've obviously got home of the world champion Minnesota Vikings. The state bird is the common loon. I got to tell you, when I was doing the research and I saw that, threw me for a loop, but then we decided, hey, what the heck? Let's replace it with the Twitter bird, and now that has become the state bird. However, though, just one quick random fact about Stearns County for some of you folks out there. In 1992, Disney filmed the opening courtroom scenes of the movie The Mighty Ducks in the beautiful Stearns County Courthouse. They filmed on the courthouse steps and in the ceremonial courtroom, and many county employees were used as extras. Their big claim to fame, coming from a small town, that's always great to be on the big screen like that. So let's talk about a few things to kick this off. I only want to talk about three things here. First one is the social media recon. Let's take a recon of the landscape and see what's happening out there. The second one deals with the litigation piece of this, bits, bytes, and barristers. So we're going to talk about some of the legal aspects, and then the third one is how do we tame this social media beast. So the first one, let's talk about the social media recon. What's happening out there? Well, folks, this is what's happening. It's like herding cats, right? I mean, you're all over the place. Everybody's adopting these platforms. It seems like Mission Impossible, doesn't it? Well, why does it seem like Mission Impossible? Because you get things like Apple putting out over 75 million phones in their last quarter. The more phones you have, the more networks you have, means the more access to government services people want. So it's actually increasing the demand on government. How do you respond to that? Well, how you respond to that kind of is framed by how has your experience been in the past. Here's a couple examples of what's happened. Even if it enrages you, they say social net speech is protected. You know, you take a look at some of these. But they had less sympathy for a reporter who actually said some things. They found out that her dismissal was legal because she talked about not having an overnight homicide. You guys are slacking out there. So not all speech is protected out there. A man with a fake account wanted to sue the Peoria over a real police raid. But here's what happens. And this is a key issue here, and I think one of the things to pay attention to today, you'll see a lot of good discussion about this. A lawyer wrote this article back in 2012. He said how deleting a Facebook post may violate free speech and lead to a lawsuit. Guess what happened? A sheriff removes a Facebook comment, gets a lawsuit. This happened just a year after that. Is it cause and effect? I'll tell you what it is. It's setting the landscape for what's happening. So just as we go through this, you're going to see a lot of these issues. We have a couple polls I think you guys will like. Now, can you tame the beast? Well, one of our favorite lolcats, social media is fabulous for memes, right? Grumpy Cat says no, but I disagree with Grumpy Cat because I tell you, when you hear Dory talk and when you hear Neil talk, you're going to realize it's not as hard as you thought it was. It's much easier than you thought it was, and there's a lot of great tools coming out that are going to help you do your job much easier and much better. So, random password hack of the day. Anybody can guess what Forrest Gump's password was? Yes, you're correct. It's 1Forrest1. Random password hack of the day. I say that in jest, but I also say it in all seriousness. I was on the national media here a while back, did a couple segments on Fox News where ISIS had actually been able to compromise the Twitter and YouTube accounts of CENTCOM. People think maybe that's not a bad deal, but you've just given a guy that had a slingshot, you now have armed him with a rocket launcher because now you can spread your propaganda. Now you can spread all sorts of messages. So as you're sitting there thinking about social media, also keep thinking about your cybersecurity on your sites. It's important to maintain the integrity of that. So before I get started, let's head to the show right now. And the first thing we're going to have is we're going to have our first poll question of the day. So what's your opinion on social media as a public record? Is it definitely a public record by law? It might be a record, but you say your activity isn't worth retaining. You feel strongly it's not a public record, or you say you don't know. And while you're responding to that, let me give you our next speaker's background, Dory Dahlberg. Dory is a web communication specialist for Stearns County, Minnesota. She has a passion for engaging communities through the web and works to promote a more open and resident-centric local government. Currently, much of her time is focused in the area of law enforcement, working with the local sheriff and police departments to improve communication. Now, Dory has represented Stearns County in speaking engagements at state and national conferences, and she's a member of the National Association of Government Web Professionals. In recent years, the Stearns County website and web projects have earned national recognition from the Center for Digital Government, Web Marketing Association, and the National Association of County Information Officers. So before we go to Dory, let's take a look at our polls and see what they say. 59% of you think it's a public record. Very good. It might be a record, but your activity is not worth retaining. About 13% of you, about 5% of you think it's not a public record, and 22% of you think you don't know. So about a 60-40 split. So I think that's actually pretty good, and we're going to get into some of these details. But before I say anything more, I'm going to turn the floor over to Dory. So Dory, the floor is yours. Take over.
Thanks, Morgan. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. And as Morgan said before, thanks for spending your hour with us. Coming from Stearns County, I am an average government worker like all of you. And what I'm going to do for the next few slides is just share with you our experience in social media and what we're doing to protect ourselves and archive those posts. The side note, the title of the presentation was going to be Bracing for the Social Media Blizzard, but I couldn't bring myself to put snow on the picture because we're finally thawing out here. So I just have a nice, pretty picture of a road there. But we are trying to keep the Digital Records Road open. A little bit of history here. Stearns County got into social media in late 2009. We ventured into the social media world, setting up accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Flickr, and YouTube. And there we shared news and events, services and information, photos and videos. Over the next few years, we added accounts on LinkedIn, Pinterest, Google+, and Tumblr. Sounds like a lot, but our motto is to go where the people are. We try new things, and we just see what sticks. Over the past 5 years, we've seen some sites gain more traction than others. Facebook has had modest but steady growth and pretty regular engagement. Twitter, LinkedIn, and Pinterest seem to be our strongest growing sites lately. And Tumblr we dropped last year. We just weren't getting any traction there, and it wasn't the right tool for our purposes. Speaking of the right tools, That's how we view social media. It's just one part of a large tool set for community engagement that we do here at Stearns. We use it along with our website, email subscription service, traditional press, and offline interactions, that face-to-face and special event kind of thing. We use social media to communicate with residents, increase our visibility, provide resources, and get feedback from them. Overall, our strategy using all these tools has been to define our business purpose or goal, get to know the audiences on the various channels, to see, as a whole, what are the trends, patterns, the actions that people take on the channels, and then we apply the appropriate tool for the task at hand. We don't necessarily use social media just for social media's sake, but we aren't afraid to try new things to see what works. Now, we couldn't take off on this journey without some awareness of the rules of the road. So as we were launching the social media accounts, we also worked with our attorney's office to research the government social media legal landscape. And as many of you probably know, 5 years ago there just wasn't much to go on. There weren't explicit rules laid out, not much that we could follow. So we kind of blazed our own trail as best we could, and we created our own policies and procedures. At this time, we have a website usage policy, which covers our main county website, and then we have a communication services usage policy for the public, and that covers the tools that I mentioned previously, including social media. One issue that has been a particular challenge for us for the last several years was data practices and archiving retention. The team here at Stearns has gone round and round asking questions like, how is social media defined? Is it a public forum? Are posts considered correspondence or maybe a public comment? What can we do to govern and store the posts when needed, get them back, and how long do we store them? It wouldn't surprise me if many of you have those exact same questions. So this is where I throw in a disclaimer. I'm not an attorney, I have no legal training, and I still find this issue a little confusing, but I'm getting there. We knew that we had to be prepared somehow. Without a clear path ahead, we wanted to err on the side of caution and do our best to prepare for the worst. That's my recommendation, is be prepared. We decided to capture and store everything on our social media sites until the rules of the road became clear. Today, our understanding is that social media records, just like other forms of data, fall under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. It's information that's created or received by us. It just happens to be in a newer format, and so it should be captured, stored, and made available upon request. Now I'd like to take just a couple minutes to show you how we do that. We've been archiving our social media records since the very beginning, late 2009, but how we do so has changed dramatically. We didn't start with a file system quite like this picture, but it kind of feels that way. It felt a little archaic. So I like to think of our experience in archiving as an evolution. We've gone from walking to biking to driving. Our first step, walking, back in 2009, I first began by manually capturing every single post on every account and saving them in a Word or PDF file. At least I thought I was getting every post. It was slow, but at least it was something. We were doing our best to keep a record, but there were 3 big drawbacks to the process. And if you can see on the screen there, it's just a screenshot of some files, many, many files. The 3 drawbacks were it took a long time. I can't recall exactly how long it took me each time I archived, but I think I blocked the memory out. So it took a long time. It wasn't very thorough. One issue I realized later was if someone made a comment on an old post that I had archived previously, I didn't necessarily always get those newer comments archived. We tried to rely on site notifications, like if someone makes a Facebook comment, Facebook would sometimes let us know that, but it wasn't reliable at all. So I suspect that we were missing quite a few things. Besides taking a long time and not being very thorough, the third drawback was that fulfilling requests for this information would have been really tough. Thankfully, we didn't have any requests back then for this information, but digging through numerous files of screenshots or text copies just would not have been easy to do. So we moved on, though, from walking to biking, and that's because we saw problems with the screenshot method, and we began to look for a vendor that could make things a little easier for us. In 2012, we selected a service that would capture Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn for us. I still captured the other screens from the other sites manually, but the big ones, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn, they were going to be taken care of. However, the service that we selected was rather cumbersome to use, and we kept running into storage limits, which pushed our budget. We found out the vendor's primary focus was on litigation document storage, and social media archiving was just kind of an aside business for them. So it turns out we didn't have the exact right tool for the job. We were moving in the right direction, but not quite there yet. That brings us from walking to biking now to driving. In 2014, we found ourselves shopping again for a vendor who could help us with our social media archiving, and we learned about ArchiveSocial. They could help us capture Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. This tool combined the benefits of capturing text, like searching the text, along with the visual context that you get with screenshots. It was a quick, easy setup. It has a nice interface, if you can see my little screenshot there, and you'll see in a few minutes with Anil. It was a nice, easy setup. It has a good interface. I love that the posts actually look like the original conversations. Our previous solution was searchable, and it had a lot of information, but you couldn't make heads or tails of it very easily. And when I look at our screens now in ArchiveSocial, I know exactly what I'm looking at. The conversations have context. So there's not much of a learning curve, and I feel like in the future when records requests do come in, we'll be able to fulfill them pretty quickly and completely. In addition to providing a great tool, so far ArchiveSocial has been a great resource for us. On their website, we have found helpful information, examples from other agencies in Minnesota who face the same challenge as we do, and I'm realizing social media for public records is their focus, not an afterthought. I feel like we're in good hands, and now we're cruising down that digital records road. That's all I have to share today as far as our history and experience with social media. I would like to turn it over to the guys now, Morgan and Anil.
Hey, Dory, fantastic job. Love the slides. I'm a big fan of not having a lot of text. You did a great job. You knocked it out of the park. Thanks you. Now, let me introduce Anil Chawla to you. And before we get to the poll question, let me tell you a little bit about Anil. I've been on several webinars with him. Very impressed about the work ArchiveSocial is doing. Anil is the founder and CEO, so it's always a great treat when you can actually have the founder and the person who runs the company on the webinar with us. Now, ArchiveSocial is a civic tech company that specializes in archiving social media for public records requirements. Now, ArchiveSocial partnered with the state of North Carolina back in 2010 to launch the world's first open interactive archive of social media. Since then, ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities, such as the City of St. Louis Park, Olmsted County in Minnesota, in addition to Stearns County, to ensure long-term transparency, which you saw was one of the keywords we talk about, for government social media communications. The company was selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, and in 2014, Gartner recognized them as a cool vendor, not just a so-so vendor, I mean a cool vendor in government. So, I mean, that says quite a bit. Now, before we turn the floor over to Anil, let's jump into a quick poll question here. Now, as we talk about this, how is your agency currently retaining records of social media? You're not retaining your own records and you rely on the networks. You take manual captures, which Dory was talking about. That's how they started out. Screenshots, copy and paste, very time intensive. You use a personal backup tool like Backupify or Social Safe. You use an automated solution for archiving, and then the payoff, the one Anil always likes to see, are you already a happy ArchiveSocial customer? So as you put those results in, let's swing to the next one. Wow, Anil, I think this is going to be, as they said in the movie Top Gun, a target-rich environment. 80% of the people said they're not retaining their own records and rely on the networks. I know you've got some great insight on that about the dangers of doing that. So, Anil, let's turn the floor over to you.
Morgan, thank you so much for the introduction there, and Dory as well. I really do appreciate your participation with us here today. Being able to hear your story, I love the analogy about walk, bike, and drive, especially like seeing the sports car there. But I think most importantly, I think why it was important for us to have you here today is that you recognize this issue back in 2009. I think being that level, having that level of proactiveness is greatly important to save your agency from trouble and cost down the road. And that's something that I'll be able to cover here today. So as we look at these results, the 83% relying on the social network for your record keeping, that's where we are today, and that's why you're here at the webinar. My goal here is to arm you with some solutions, not just ArchiveSocial. We're going to talk through a handful of different solutions so that by the end of this webinar, you have some key takeaways and some action items. To give you a better feel of the agenda that I have here in terms of what I want to cover, I want to start, though, by talking about this issue of social media as a record, as a public record and as a legal record. And I'm not going to just talk at an academic level. I really want to dive deep into some real-life examples, some real case studies. Dory mentioned that they're prepared for if and when they receive that records request. Well, there are agencies across the country that have received requests already in the last several years. And so we'll talk about some of those so you have an idea of what that might look like and how to be prepared. And then, of course, we'll talk about solutions. What I'd like to do is walk through 4 different solutions, starting from the most basic, the walk that Dory talked about, and moving all the way up to that drive. But talking about the solutions in a little bit more detail so that you can figure out what fits your agency the best today. We will find some time for an automated archive so that you can see exactly how Stearns County is automating their record keeping in compliance with the Data Practices Act. And then, of course, we're here to answer your questions, so please use that Q&A window. Go ahead and put your questions in there as we're talking, and we'll be sure to carve out some time at the end. Now, to start with, we had a poll early on in this webinar where we asked how you felt about social media as a public record, and about 70% of you said that it's either a record that you certainly have to keep, or it's a record but maybe you don't have to keep it, but it is a record. The other 30%, this is for you. I know there's a lack of clarity, there's some confusion in the space, but the good news is that in the last few years, the confusion is clearing up, and records authorities, state authorities from across the country are coming out very clear on the issue of social media being a public record. And to just cite the Data Practices Act here, there's some language in the Act. It's, again, very broad. It's a law that was written several years ago, so it doesn't have anything about social media specifically in the law. But the way the law was written is to be very forward-thinking and to say that information in any form, written, computerized, on recording tape, and so on. And so it's that in any form, that language that keeps the law broad enough to really speak to the content of the record, not the physical format. And we see this throughout every records law in the United States. Many of the laws have language along the lines of regardless of physical form. And to make that real, what this is really saying is that if you were to receive a crime tip, it doesn't matter if that crime tip were to come in on a piece of paper, on an email, or in a tweet. A crime tip is a crime tip. It's the nature of the content that really matters. So that fundamentally sets the requirement there in Minnesota and across the state. Again, the records laws across the United States all derived out of the Freedom of Information Act at the federal level. U.S. National Archives has already come out with guidance. Actually, at about 2009, they came out with guidance stating that social media should be considered a record under FOIA and the federal records requirements. And that has gone down to all the different states. So states across the country, more than a dozen different states have had either the Secretary of State's office, the Attorney General's, or the Records and Archives divisions come out and interpret the laws that have that same language to say that social media is a record. But then the big question then becomes, if social media can be a record, are we actually creating records? And I know about 13% of you said that, yes, it's probably a record, but we're not doing anything worth keeping. So what I'd like to do is just challenge you to think about your social media and the value of your social media, because we are seeing more and more that social media is a key channel for how government serves its citizens. And an area where you'll see a lot of records being created that are worth keeping is the area of public safety and emergency response. So we're all very familiar with some of the high-profile incidents that the nation has faced in the last few years, ranging from hurricanes to airport shootings, and one of the most prominent is probably the Boston Marathon bombings. in which social media really proved itself as almost critical infrastructure for government to get the message out to the citizens. It was the most rapid, efficient way to get information out, to squash rumors, protect the citizens. And we really saw the Boston PD leverage Twitter in particular during the marathon bombings and the hunt for the suspect. And a quick trivia fact here is that when the Boston PD finally caught the terror suspect, the very first announcement of catching that suspect was not a tip to a journalist or a news release on their website. It was simply a tweet. In fact, all of the communication, many of the communications that were coming out from Boston PD during this time were coming out on Twitter because it was the most efficient way to get the information out, and news sources were then citing the tweets, and people were making decisions based on this Twitter feed. And you can see how that kind of content really is creating record worth keeping for public records and for legal reasons. And hopefully your jurisdiction will never face tragedy at the level of the marathon bombings, but we do all face public safety concerns and natural disasters and winter storms and so forth. And being able to utilize social media during those times is incredibly important. You don't want to be holding back on your social media because you're worried about creating records that aren't being maintained. And then more fundamentally, outside of the emergencies and public safety, if you think about government, at least my view on government is that government exists to serve the citizens. Fundamentally, that's what every government agency, every aspect of government is there to serve the citizens in some manner. And therefore, when different departments and agencies have a presence on Facebook and Twitter, ultimately what's going to happen on these sites is citizen service. That's where the citizens are, after all. And so here's an example from Texas DOT that may not seem so obvious in the beginning, but I want to explain it to you so you can see how something like this could constitute a record. Essentially, the DOT had a woman trying to reach them over the phone, and she was unable to reach them over the phone, so she started tweeting to them. They said, well, the phone lines might be busy, try again. And ultimately, the woman discovered that a phone number for the DOT that was printed on a mailing was incorrect. And so she was able to inform the DOT that this was an incorrect printing on the mailing, this phone number needed to be corrected, and have this conversation. It all happened on Twitter. And again, this is not something that you might get terribly concerned about from a legal standpoint. As far as I know, nothing ever came out of this, and nothing should have. But you can see how customer service is happening, and it's not even related to traffic, which is the DOT's main focus. They're just simply serving the citizen in a different way here over social media, and this is the place that it got documented. And this is what happens day in and day out on social media. And most of the time, it's fairly innocuous conversation. And even if it is, though, as I'll go through the case studies, you'll see it's important to have documentation of it because you as a government do face litigation, and we don't want that litigation to hold back your social media strategy, ultimately hold back the way you serve your citizens. So the next question is, okay, so perhaps our agencies are creating public records on a fairly frequent basis, and maybe I'm not so concerned about them, maybe I am, but who's really asking for them? Isn't this out there on Facebook and Twitter? So here's a very real example. The Seattle PD has a number of Twitter feeds where they automatically post the police activity, kind of like a police scanner on Twitter, across all of their different police beats. And a citizen in Seattle noticed that sometimes the feeds may have been delayed or missing information. So the citizen actually started tweeting to Seattle PD and a few tweets and said, I want the archives of all of the tweets for all of your beats, and please consider this a public records request. So in effect, the citizen made a public records request for social media using social media. It's really a sign of the times, the changing expectations that you are, as a government agency, have made yourself available on social media. So why not? Why not ask for this information over Twitter? Now, Seattle PD did direct the citizen to a web form to fill it out, and they came back and said, give us 3 weeks to work on this public records request. But ultimately, this was a valid request because the information the citizen was seeking was not on Twitter. He was wondering if it was in an archive somewhere, and he asked for it, and Seattle had to provide it. And the question is, how do you avoid spending 3 weeks dealing with this? This could be this could create a lot of overhead for your agency. How do you facilitate this in perhaps even 3 minutes? And at the end of the day, many agencies have still not received specific requests for social media content. We'll cover a few that have, but in the general case, most people aren't yet receiving requests for social media. But if you look at the list that I have here on the slide right now, you may recognize language that you see here. And what we found with our customer base is a lot of our customers are receiving public records requests that are fairly general. any and all documents, all notifications of the street closure, all emails and communications. If you think about these requests, they actually do include your social media. And so to fully comply with the request and provide the information that's requested, if you've utilized social networking to get this kind of information out that falls under the scope of the request, to completely satisfy that request, you do want to include your social media content. And that's something that archiving your social media and having a record management strategy will help you get ahead of this before someone who requests this content and recognizes they're not getting everything they asked for. So in terms of that, in terms of someone really asking for this content, outside of that tweet example that I gave you, I do want to share some case studies that we've seen out there in the space so that you can really bulletproof as much as possible your social media policy and your strategy. Of course, there's always going to be risk, but it's a matter of being prepared, just like Stearns County has been prepared since 2009. And in order to talk about this, I actually want to share a case study from email first, because there's a lot to learn from email. About 15 to 20 years ago, we had the same conversations about whether or not email was a public record, and a lot of folks thought it probably wasn't a record, and there's not much important happening on email, and we all know what's happened since. And the exact same thing's happening with social media, and we've learned a lot of lessons. In this case, a citizen had requested an email from the city of Shoreline, Washington. They made this request in 2006. And they wanted the email because they wanted to know who sent it and how the decision came about. And they received a copy of the email. Someone had forwarded the original email, and so they had the forwarded copy. And the citizen wasn't satisfied with the forwarded copy, so they asked for the original email. Now, the city had actually deleted the original. They felt that they had the copy that may have been good enough. And so this went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that no, the copy is not good enough. You need the original email. In fact, the citizen wanted the original metadata out of the original email. If you're not familiar with metadata, this is data that's embedded in the content. So underneath that email was all this data about how it was sent and what computer servers it went across and what were the timestamps and so forth. And the citizen wanted that information as well, and the Washington Supreme Court ruled, yes, this is part of the public record. Fined the city $100,000, and ultimately the city had to pay more than $500,000 to settle the case, paying for the plaintiff's fees. So it really showed that having some record is not good enough, because the difference between some record and a complete comprehensive record is potentially $500,000. Now, how this translates to social media. If you look at a tweet, we all know that a tweet's 140 characters, and Dory mentioned doing screenshots, and a lot of agencies are utilizing screenshots today because that's one of the easiest thing you can start doing, and maybe the technology not everyone's aware of the technology that's available. But if you look at a tweet like this with 140 characters, or 126 characters in this case, it has more than 2,000 characters of metadata. And so thinking about how comprehensive you can be is really important. And really thinking about this record as more than just 140 characters, but really about a record of communication that happened with particular timing information, how it was sent, who it was sent from. All that really defines that communication and can be really important in a legal context. Now, the second broad case study that I have from just the industry in general is a little bit closer to home, dealing with social media, but it actually has nothing to do with public records. This is a case from 2012 in which the Honolulu PD had been moderating content from their Facebook page because an advocacy group was making statements that were along the lines of their beliefs in terms of gun ownership and being pro-gun. And while the Honolulu PD had no opinion on supporting or not supporting those opinions, they felt like the content was irrelevant. So what they ended up doing is they ended up moderating the content, and the folks that are posting actually filed a lawsuit saying they have a First Amendment right of freedom of speech to be able to post their opinion about these issues on a government forum. Now, the case was never ruled upon. The city actually decided to settle the case by paying $30,000 in attorney's fees. So it does create a little bit of pause in government in terms of content moderation. Now, here at ArchiveSocial, we're not your lawyers, but we certainly do believe in your ability to moderate content. And we have a free social media policy that I can share with you. But we have examples of social media policies that are very clear on moderation, and you should definitely have one in place if you are moderating content. But the key point that I want to make here is that this has nothing to do with public records, but it's government using social media. And what government does can and will eventually find itself to court. It found itself in a legal situation, and ultimately, Honolulu had deleted this content. So in order to be able to tell their side of the story, you really hope they kept records so they could actually show what they deleted and be able to tell that full story. So it's important to have records no matter what in case you end up in a legal situation like this. And finally, I'm going to bring it a little bit closer to home, at least here for ArchiveSocial. We've heard about these cases in the industry and really motivated us to start this company so that we could help agencies get ahead of this problem so that you weren't limiting your social media. We want you to succeed with this platform because we think it really does transform the way you serve your citizens. But now we have heard some stories from our own customer base. And I want to share 3 of them really quickly here with you. The first is from South Florida, just from the new year, where a police department was basically doing their job. They learned about a potentially scammy company, and they had learned about this from a law firm, so they put out a scam alert on their Facebook pages to alert the citizens. The company did not, as you might imagine, did not agree with this label and actually complained to the city. The city then removed the postings about the company being a scam. Then the company came back and filed a lawsuit alleging damages to their business operations and their business success due to this label. And in the lawsuit, the company said, we want records of all the social media postings related to us being a scam, including the ones you've already removed. And so again, this is a customer of ours. They had fortunately been archiving for just a few months, and they're able to produce that history pretty instantaneously for this lawsuit, and at least have the records, because not having that record would put them in a far more disadvantaged position. The second case is across the country in California. This is, again, another police department effectively doing their job. Now, in this case, instead of the police department kind of going above and beyond with this protecting the citizens, as this agency probably does, but in this case, what had happened was they were simply implementing a city program. So they were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing without a doubt in line with the city's policies. And this was a gun buyback program they had to get the word out for. And the NRA actually showed up with a public information request for the gun buyback program, asking for all the social media postings. And again, this city fortunately had been in a free trial of our product. So just 3 weeks in the free trial, received this public information request and was able to fulfill it. And they had been running the gun buyback program in accordance with policies. So there was no lawsuit that came out of it. But it was certainly a risk for them to receive this kind of request. And they acted proactively just in time. And then finally, we have a government technology case study out there with the city of Spokane, Washington. One of our earliest customers had decided to be really proactive because they'd seen the legal landscape there in the state of Washington around electronic records. And I think about a little less than a year after they signed up with us, they received a lawsuit related to a person dying on a kayaking trip. Now, what had happened was the city had just simply helped promote this event on Facebook. So they were just promoting local events like probably every government agency does on social media. But because somebody died, there was a lawsuit, and the lawsuit did ask for social media postings related to that event. So doing something as simple as just promoting events, even that can pull you into a legal situation, and it's important to be prepared. And again, Spokane was prepared. They were able to easily find and export the content. And so we have a case study out there that I encourage you to download. I think we'll send it out after the webinar as well. So hopefully at this point I've given you enough to think about in terms of your own social media usage and the potential legal landscape. But we don't want to scare you out of social media. In fact, again, we believe this is fundamentally transformative to how you serve your citizens. So let's talk about some solutions. Now, I know about 80% of you are currently relying on the social networks. This strategy, or I wouldn't call it a strategy. The current state of relying on the networks is where you are today, where most agencies across the country are today. I don't want you to feel bad about it, but you need to think about retaining this information yourself. Fundamentally, the social networks do not provide any guarantees about keeping these records for you. They do not feel that they have any obligation in the government to maintain this information, particularly if it's deleted. In fact, Facebook has information about content that's deleted. It's content they can no longer produce even under subpoena. And so the moment something's deleted, it's gone forever. And while you might not delete anything, your citizens certainly can. Your citizen, again, might send you a crime tip over a direct message, or send you some citizen feedback or a complaint over Facebook, and they may delete that. And you really want to have those records in your control, not relying on the networks. So let's talk about how you can do that. Now, the first, a bit of this will match up to Dory's presentation in terms of walking. It says just manually archive. Take those screenshots. It's definitely better than doing nothing. The fact that Stearns County started this in 2009 is really forward-thinking and really a smart move by their agency to take those screenshots. No matter how time-consuming it was better to have the information than to not have it in case there was a legal situation. Now, screenshotting is free from a cost standpoint, but it's not actually free when you think about your time. And Dory mentioned that she doesn't even want to think about how much time she spent. We have customers that spend 20 to 30 hours taking screenshots before they started automating their archiving. So it's not a long-term solution, but it's definitely a way to start, particularly if you're moderating content. You want to think about how you're going to organize and manage that content. You're not going to really be able to search it, so that organization is important. But ultimately, the screenshots are not the best records you can have. We talked about metadata, and a screenshot's not going to have the metadata, so it's an easily disputable record. Anybody can Photoshop anything. So again, it's a better-than-nothing solution, but not ideal. What's much better is to look at an automated solution. And on the market, there have been a number of personal backup tools available to government agencies and individuals. These backup tools are built, I call them personal backup tools because they were built for consumers to back up their own social media. So they are very basic, but they are low cost as well. Backupify, SocialSafe, and so forth are a couple of examples. These solutions are automated, again, much better than having to take the screenshots yourself. They're very cheap from a cost standpoint. I think Backupify is now $100 a month, which is not as inexpensive as it used to be, but it's still fairly inexpensive. SocialSafe is something like $20 a year. However, SocialSafe stores the content on your own local hard drive, so then you have to figure out how to back that up. Ultimately, again, these are not long-term solutions because they're not built for government record keeping. They're built for individuals. They may not be as comprehensive as you'd like, and they certainly don't provide any of the tools around really searching for and producing the records if needed. So you're doing a good job. You're doing a decent job storing the data, but you probably don't have what you need to produce it, and that's really what matters when we talk about records management. But it is automated and something worth considering if you have a small budget. So what I fundamentally recommend is looking at a archiving solution. And there are many archiving vendors out there, from email archiving and web page archiving, and other other industries have now started to add social media to the mix. And so the vendors that come from email archiving or web page archiving, I like to refer to them as all-in-one archiving because they're really trying to provide one spot to do it all, which I think is a really good ideal concept, to have everything in one place. What I'll caution you on is understanding between the different vendors. There are some vendors that are a lot better than others because when you do it all, you might not be so good at certain specific things. You might be really good at email archiving, but not so good at social media archiving. And so some things to look out for are, is there any kind of data conversion? Are those vendors storing the authentic record with all of the metadata without any kind of data conversion so that you can meet the legal requirements and be prepared if someone requests it? How are they storing content like social media, which is fundamentally interactive? It's a conversation. How are they storing that alongside types like email, where those are static? Are they chopping up the social media into an email-like format? Can you reconstruct the conversations? Ultimately, you want to figure out, with these solutions, are you going to be prepared and able to produce the content when it comes time? Because setting it up is pretty easy. Having it all in one place is nice, but what's much nicer is being able to actually work with the data when you need it. Now, these solutions are a few $1,000s a year and beyond. You do want to think about setup fees, fees for pulling the history of your data. A lot of these companies do have some fees that you need to look at. So those are the different tools that you can use to evaluate the archiving vendors out there. Ultimately, what it boils down to are these 4 key criteria. No matter what you do, I strongly encourage you to look at these criteria. How quickly can you get your hands on this data? The frequency is important because it's out there on Facebook and Twitter. You don't own the data until you get it in your hands. Comprehensiveness, you want that metadata. You want both sides of the conversation to protect your agency. Having more is better than less nowadays with social media, particularly because it's broadcast in public. So unlike email and other types of content that are internal, it's out there and someone may have seen it, so you're better off having more than less. Authenticity is being ready to use that content in a legal situation, being able to prove that the record is accurate. A screenshot may be really hard to prove in terms of accuracy. So how do you prove that accuracy, that you didn't Photoshop that content? And then context is how easily can you make sense of the data when you need it. Ultimately, it's not about storing data. It's about being able to produce it and make sense of it and use it. Can you replay that Facebook conversation from 4 years ago with 100 comments on it? Can you recreate that Twitter timeline, so on and so forth? So that's what motivated us to start this company, ArchiveSocial. We are primarily and solely focused on social media archiving and also primarily focused on government as a customer. We work with more than 300 or nearly 300 government agencies across the country in more than 30 different states. And this is what we live and breathe. What I want to do is just highlight what some of our customers have done, which is, I think, really, really amazing to see this trend in open data and open government being put into concrete so people can actually see what open government means. And so some of our customers have launched open archives with us, which you can actually go and access the records yourself, including Snohomish County is one example I'd like to highlight that had the mudslide disaster last year. And you can actually go back and replay their emergency response there in their open archive. So it's really taking transparency to its fullest. And with that, what I'd like to do with here, just the 2 minutes I have remaining, as we promised, a quick demonstration to see how your peers in Minnesota are approaching this issue of archiving social media. I have the archive here for Stearns County on our screen. And what I want to do is, I'm not going to give you a whole product demonstration here, but I want to touch on those 4 criteria that I talked about so you can see what it means to have an automated archive. Again, this is something that's set up in about 15 or 20 minutes. We do go get the history of your social media so that you have everything from as much as we can get from the network so you're not starting from scratch. And then we automatically continuously archive this throughout the day. But what I'm going to focus on here is the search interface and really being able to get to the data, because as I said, that's the most important aspect, is being able to actually find, produce, and make sense of that information. And so if Stearns County were to have a situation, what they'd be able to do is come in here, isolate content by date range, search across all of their social media. We do support Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram. Being able to isolate content, say that's only on Twitter. Be able to create a complex search if needed that not only includes keywords, but even who may have sent the message, who may have received it, and so on and so forth. Having a lot of tools at your disposal just to be able to navigate through the wealth of information you're going to collect that's being collected automatically. But to that point, what I'm going to do is show you a wildcard search in the archive that has more than 8,000 records. At the end of the day, a public information request is a needle in a haystack problem. And what you look for in your solutions, any solution you look at, is, again, being able to really make sense of that information without context. So being able to look at the content, seeing the images and links, all of that in one place. Having this continuous capture, so we can sort by time here just to see how recently we captured content for Stearns County, as recent as 48 minutes ago. And then being able to filter down to find what you want. So having the tools in place to really sift through all these records that you've collected. So for example, we could actually go down and filter to August 2012, 2.5 years ago, and look at the content that's present. Be able to look at a tweet that's been captured, get some additional context, like what does that bit.ly actually point to, so that you have that information in the archive. Be able to look at the metadata behind this record. And I know this is partially off your screen, but I'll show you the metadata behind this tweet. You can see that this little tweet had so much metadata. Being able to get that information at your fingertips, find specific content, say a comment that a citizen may have left, being able to filter down, and then replay the conversation. So I can take this one comment here and recreate that conversation so that you can see all of the comments on it, view the high-resolution photo that's been captured by the system, and then ultimately turn that into a PDF. That brings together that frequency, that comprehensiveness, that authenticity with the metadata, and ultimately that context. So as an agency, you're no longer worried about all those legal case studies I just talked to you about. You're ready in case that ever happens. You've got all the record keeping in place and able to produce it. And that's really what I encourage you to look for in your long-term strategy, regardless of what you're able to put in place today. And so with that, I'm going to just transition back to Morgan. And the last thing I'll do is I'll just bring up my contact information. This is my direct phone number. So if you have any way that I can be a resource to you, please do not hesitate. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
Hey, and Neil, again, terrific job. If you guys, like I said, 80% of you who weren't doing it, now you've obviously seen a way that you can do it. I encourage you to reach out to Neil. We've done several webinars, a lot of good information, and also with Dory, great information. So now we're into the Q&A part. So we have about 10 minutes left. So let's dive in because we are getting some good questions. And actually, Dory, this first one is from you. It's from Jared Rauch. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Jared. It says, does Stearns County consider social media records, tweets, things like that as an official record that's on their retention schedule? How long does the retention schedule require those records to be kept?
Thanks, Morgan. That's a really good question, Jared. And I know you're looking for a magic number, like 3 years, and I don't have that magic number for you, but what I can tell you is the actual timeline for retention is something that I am trying to sift through myself currently. The way our record retention schedules work, as far as what I've seen in my research so far, is that they're categorized by content, not by format. So if you have information that's a press release, whether it went out by email or social media or printed out on a piece of paper, the point is that it's a press release versus meeting minutes or agendas or annual report. So we do have in our record retention schedules, we have a line item for email. We don't have anything that says social media. But I've looked at the line item for email, and the retention recommendation for that is, it says dependent on what the subject is. So then you'd have to think, well, what is the subject, what's the type of content versus the format it's in. That's the challenge I'm having right now with determining an actual retention timeline is how do we sift through the social media posts that we have and retain them relative to what the posts are about, as opposed to the fact that they all just happen to be on Facebook. I'm not sure if that's making sense, but those are the questions I'm dealing with right at this moment. Anil or Morgan, would you like to jump in?
Sure. Actually, I was going to tee this up for Neil because great news is that in our pre-webinar discussion, Anil was just letting us know about a new feature and some retention features that ArchiveSocial may be announcing, or some things you want to talk about, Anil. So what can you tell us about from a retention standpoint?
Sure, absolutely. And Dory, what you said does make a lot of sense. We get this question all the time. It's a really important question is, how does this fit into record retention schedules? And as you said, it really does, the retention period really does get decided upon based on the nature of the content. Usually not the medium itself, but the content. So was this a crime tip? Was it a citizen complaint? Or was it administrative values? So the reality is that every jurisdiction already has a retention schedule in place today, and it's a matter of just figuring out where each social media communication fits in that existing retention schedules. I will say that as a practical shortcut, some jurisdictions do have more of a default catch-all retention schedule for the physical format. So your email only has to be maintained 3 years, and there are jurisdictions looking at doing the same thing with social media, of retaining that all social media is retained for the same fixed amount of time. And then Morgan, what you alluded to is that that's something that's, because it's come up so many times, that we recently launched in our product is the ability to configure these retention schedules so that you can dispose records when you reach a certain time period. We provide some different ways to isolate the content in big blocks. So you might decide that all of your police department's Facebook content has a particular fixed retention period that's a little bit longer than the retention period for the rest of the city. So we provide some of that functionality, and we'll continue to iterate on. And ultimately, what our intent is to allow you to be able to tag content such that you're able to retain different records based on the nature of their content, exactly in accordance with the law. So it's something that we take very seriously, and it's important for us to keep working on it. So as jurisdictions develop policies, we're very interested in learning how we can best fulfill those.
Yeah, and that's great. And for you folks out there, keep the questions coming in. Go to your Q&A. Keep sending in stuff. We've got some more coming in. And for you folks, the advantage of working with a company the size of ArchiveSocial is their ability to respond quickly. They're not some big lumbering giant out there that takes a couple years to do this. When they find the need, they're able to address it quickly. And obviously in social media, if you snooze, you lose. There's a lot of things happening. You've got to do it quickly. So our next question comes from Ginger Peterson. And actually, this is a good one, too. Ginger says, our sheriff's office is just now getting into the social media arena with planning a Facebook page. What are your suggestions for those like us who haven't even created our Facebook page? Before I give that to Dory, I will give you one piece of advice. Many, many horror stories of officers, deputies, doing things that violate department policy. Biggest thing is work through your policies. Make sure you've got good governance and policies on how to use it. Unfortunately, too many people have lost their jobs because of inappropriate postings on social media. But Dory, let's kick that over to you first, followed by Anil. What kind of suggestions for you have when they're just nascent? They just want to open up a Facebook page.
thanks, Ginger, for the question. And Morgan, I completely agree with you that whatever they start to do, whatever you start to do, Ginger, adhere to the policies. Here at Stearns, we have not yet opened up social media to, say, the frontline officers and general staff. We have a select handful of folks who share social media responsibilities. We don't see social media, like many agencies do, as something you toss at your interns or open it up to everybody. We still want to have a little bit of control, and it's an intentional, purposeful tool for us. So as a sheriff's office, I would start out with a handful of folks who you can trust. You've gone through some guidelines, best practices, done some research together, and keep a few things in mind. Whenever we start something new, we, again, look at the strategies I mentioned earlier. We look at our business purpose and goal. Why are you having a Facebook page? Is it to share crime prevention tips? Is it to get tips? You know, it might be lots of different goals, but keep that in the back of your mind. Don't be afraid to try things. Your audience on Facebook is going to be different than what you're used to with, you know, in-person events and phone and email. But go for it. Have a little bit of fun. You know, there's that gray area that you don't want to go beyond, but have a little bit of fun. Have a personal sense of humor, a personality there, and just remember why you're doing it. And social media is not really, as a communications tool, it's different, but it's not any more risky than the other things that we do if you go in with a clear head, have your policies in place, and do it sensibly.
You know, great advice, too. And Anil, when you've dealt with departments and other agencies that are just starting their social media presence, what kind of insight, what kind of guidance have you been giving them?
Well, I 100% agree with everything that Dory just said. And just to add on, one of the easiest ways, one of the best things to do in government in general, as we've seen with new technologies, is to learn from others. And so there are a lot of sheriff's offices out there that are being very successful with social media. And some of the things that they're doing echo what Dory pointed out, like having a little bit of a personality, making sure that who has access are the folks that you can trust and are trained to understand how to appropriately communicate on behalf of your agency. But number one, I just encourage you to look at sheriff's offices where this is working well and copy and iterate on top of what they're doing. And then to go back to what you said, Morgan, the policy is fundamental. We've already talked about record retention in detail, so that's hopefully at this point that's a no-brainer in terms of having that in your social media policy. But you also want to have policies around what does it mean to have a social media account. There's an internal use policy that separates an officer's personal social media from their professional, because as soon as it becomes professional usage, there's obviously a lot of implications there, including the records retention. And then you want to have an external policy that you make very clear to your citizens how you're going to run this site. A good phrase to put in your policy is a limited public forum, so that you emphasize the fact that you do have some rights to moderate. You want to be very clear on how you're going to moderate and when you will moderate, and you want to enforce that policy in a way that's very clear and make that policy very available on all of your sites. When I say all this, though, I really don't want to encourage you to spend 18 months, 24 months developing a policy, as unfortunately many agencies have, because this work has been done. The lessons have been learned. People have come to put the best practices together. So there are policies out there that you can get together that have been tried and tested, and get it in place first before you do anything on that site. But don't be afraid to do what you want to try to do and have that intention leading the way. And in terms of policy, by the way, you can email me directly. I've got a template that we compiled from best practices across the country, and I'm sure Dory has the Stearns County policy as well. So we'd be happy to share that with you.
Sure. Time for two last quick questions. We'll make them quick. We're getting one. I believe it's Dennis Peters asked, and this goes right back into real quickly for you, Neil. How much does it cost? You know, what's the installation process? We always get this question. I'm glad you brought it up, Dennis.
Oh, sure. Dennis, thank you for asking. So as a company that sells transparency, we're completely transparent about this. You can see our pricing on our website. But just to give you an idea, the vast majority of government agencies across the country fit in what we call our standard pricing, which is intended to be a discretionary spend. So it's under $5,000 annual, absolutely no hidden fees. That's something that we just cannot do. We hate to see that in the archiving space. So we have no fees. What you see is what you get, unlimited data storage. And it's based on the volume of social media activity that you have. So are you generating 2,000 new records a month, 5,000 new records a month, and so on and so forth? Based on how much value you're seeing from social media, that's how much value we provide you. And we account for spikes and natural disasters that may influence your social media usage. And so under 5,000 annual is a baseline, and then we do have some lower pricing plans for agencies that are just getting started that make it extremely affordable. And again, most of our customers set this up in less than 30 minutes. If you're interested at all, I would encourage you to go to our website. We have a Sample Your Archive button where you can actually create an archive for yourself in less than 60 seconds. And you'll see exactly how it works in an investment of less than 2 or 3 minutes.
Sounds good. And Dory, last question for you. We have about 30 seconds. So have you had any problems with negative or hateful comments?
Thankfully, we have not had any major issues. We do get negative comments, but we haven't had anything that we would consider hate speech that had to be addressed with a heavy hand. We do allow the negative comments. If people don't like us, don't like our commissioners, we just deal with it. It's feedback like anything else. As long as it doesn't cross that line, we let it go.
Well, and you got to sometimes, especially as those who used to be in law enforcement back in the day, sometimes you just got to have a thick skin, especially on social media, because you just don't get it from one person. You might get it from 1,000. So that's great advice. So, hey, look, folks, we want to be respectful of our 1-hour commitment, so we want to wrap it up at this point. First thing we want to do is thank our sponsor, Anil and ArchiveSocial, for being a big part of this event, and also big thank you to Dory Dahlberg. Way to go. Great presentation, and also to Anil. Great insight, great information, and a special thanks, like I said, to you guys in the audience there for taking an hour out of your day. Remember, you're going to get an email from us. You're going to be able to, in the next 48 hours, we'll provide everybody with a link to the recording for your reference. Share it with your colleagues. Make sure that you get it out there. So let's bring this to a close. We want to thank you again for attending Government Technology and our webinar with ArchiveSocial. We have several more. Make sure you check back frequently for some of the new events coming out. But again, thank you guys for today. Have a great day, and stay safe while you're tweeting and Facebooking out there. Don't do it while you're driving. Have a good afternoon, folks.